Okay, so welcome back. Best way to describe this is I've tried to have a test fit and nothing fits. Now, we spoke about it briefly before. The trouble with resin is it sags over time, and to be honest, as we know, this kit is 25 years old. It's sat in a box, the original box by the looks of it. It's had obviously the weight of the resin on top of it. And certainly some of the bits that have been packed have started to warp, sag, push down. Notably, the most not obvious one is this piece. Now, this is the front end of the top half of the superstructure. And I don't know how well, let's do it this way, the camera might pick it up, all right? But what it is, you may notice that it's all very sharp along here, it gets to about here, and it seems to go downhill. Well, actually it's supposed to go uphill. So what it's lost when you look at it this way is this bit at the back should be a lot taller up here. And in fact, I've made a little design of what it should be. So when you see it, it actually should be like this far up. So as you can see, we are nowhere near it whatsoever. So as you can see, that's how the difference is. So when this is in here, it should be right up there. The point, in fact, that really shows it off very nicely, this is the bit from the second half back, and it should sit on like this. And as you can see, this huge gap, there we go, at the bottom here, okay, as this sits on. So this actually sits just like that, and we've got this huge gap, and this is where it's physically sagged. And as I say, I don't know which one it is, maybe you can get a look at it on this way, but it's gone flat. So we need to straighten that one up. I've looked at a few of the other parts as well, because to be honest, what I tried to do, I've cleaned off all those flashy bits and taken care of any sort of, you know, lumps, bumps and bits sticking out that are going to interfere with the fit. As we've gone around this entire thing, and immediately it's evident that we've got real problems with warpage, to the point where some of it I think would be quite easy to fix, some of it, like we've just found out there, is going to be a real headache. And the best way of doing it, because obviously you can only put a certain amount of stress through pulling it before it's going to crack the resin. Also, the point is that if you've got something like these guys, if they're sort of out of kilter and pulling down, it's going to put stress onto the main bit itself, and before we know it, instead of having a nice sharp angled Star Destroyer, it's going to be wavy, where it's all trying to pull itself straight and everything else. Some of them also I fixed some of the problems. So this guy here had sheared off this rear section, and as you can see, you can't see anything in there at all. It's completely fixed, and I'll do this one here as well. So to be honest, twofold system with this. I'm going to super glue everything as just to tack it in place, and you see we've got nice white sharp edges here. So we're just going to put a couple of drops, not going tons of it absolutely everywhere, okay? Because obviously the more you put on, the more it's going to take time to fix. So we've got a little bit too much there and there, we just pinch that. Okay, we just bring those two halves together. And to be honest, it's the great thing with resin is that because it snaps very, very cleanly, it gives you very nice clean joints to go. Now, if it was styrene and done this, it would have bent it, and you'd have had the white marks all around it and everything else like that, and it would have been a real problem, because, as I say, you need to straighten it up and then fix it and then glue it back in place, and the chances of it not being bent are pretty remote. Hopefully that's stuck, but as you can see, we've put that one on now, and you would never know. Obviously with resin as well, it's really easy to sand, so you can just fix any problems, you can actually just sand them and take care of it, and hence whilst we've got a lot of those blocks and lumps and bumps taken care of. So what I've been doing here is really, as I said, trying to put it together, seeing where we've got real problems that are going to need fixing properly, and where we can sort of, you know, put it together. Now originally I was going to do it that we were going to do the entire lower area first, make sure that's all good and everything else like that. Then we were going to put up the actual side areas. This is where the laser cannons are. We were going to put those on, okay, and get them in. We were happy. Then we were going to put the top on. I don't think it's actually going to work like that. I think what we're going to have to do is sort of juggle it together to make sure everything's lining up and we've got it as straight as possible. Now you might be able to see down here how well the camera gets, probably can't see it. What I've got is these are solid brass bars, very, very heavy, so I'm laying them down on various parts to straighten them out and leaving them overnight, and hopefully, and it's working quite well, we are bending things back into position. So we've got various little things like we were saying, like if we can just lift this one off, I've temporarily taped these bits in here together, but we've got this situation where this is ducktailing off. It's like a duck's tail on one side. This side's fine, but this side's actually tailing off. So again, what I'm going to do tonight, I'll put this one down, we're going to put the bars on top of it and try and level it out like that without coming in with heat and with hot water and everything else to try to get it all in. But it is working quite well. It's just that when you come to put various shapes together and everything else and trying to get it in, it's like all over the place. And to be honest, I mocked it up earlier and it just doesn't fit. It just, you cannot get anything to go in. And obviously you've got various tabs, locating tabs to seat these things on, and when you put them in there, it pulls it all out of kilter. So it's a lot more work from setting it up point of view than I thought we were going to have. I thought we were going to have obviously problems with those side strips. They looked a little bit warpy and everything else, but certainly I've been playing with this area. This is that huge bottom plate that's going to be like this, if we can get it in. But what we need to do is that, you know, you don't appreciate, is we've got to get the angle correct of it bending upwards. So we can't let this part just sort of bend itself around, because what it's going to do is pull it out of kilter. Then you're going to come in with other areas and they're going to need a lot of fixing. The other things as well, we're going to need to fix the tips on all of these, and to be honest, these top ones, we've got some nasty chunks out of one side. Actually, it's this one here. We've got some chunks out of the back end, so these need to be all fixed. But I think from a personal point of view, what we're going to do, the way I'm going to attack this, is to actually try and get it together as best as we can. And then we're going to try and then pull it all around, and we're going to try and sort of get it into the correct jig shape by using a lot of rod. Now we've got a lot of different scales of this brass rod, which what I'm probably going to do is inlay it into the actual kit first, get it put in so we can tell what is straight and what's not, because these shapes you can see in the bottom here, this is what this was. It was actually steel rod inserted into it to give this thing rigidity. So that's what we're going to try and mimic. So we might go round and do it in some areas, but you might be able to see, here's a nice case example. We've got the original cut line coming down here. You might be able to see on this side one here. You can see it. That was where the original cut line was, and then obviously they put another one in to make this into a kit and everything else like it. And actually, if you look very closely, it just goes to show that their work is no different, because this is the original seam line that runs down here right the way across, and theirs isn't perfect either. So, okay. Next up for me, what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and tack some of the parts together to give us that feel of, you know, where things are going to start to lie. So, for instance, what we're going to do, we are going to try and put in half of the actual reactor, let's take that one off, onto the bottom here, just so we can get one side lined up and it's all in and it's happy and everything else like that. So what we're going to do for the entire of the model for the moment, we're literally just going to go around and we're going to tack it with a little bit of super glue, okay, in all the areas. So we're going to just put a little drop down there, a little bit drop round here, and we're doing to the insides of the tabs and just tiny little spots elsewhere, okay. And then what we can do is we can literally pop this one in. Okay, and as you can see, the back end fits exceptionally well. Then we can use some little clamps and things just to hold these down and to get the bite working. And then obviously we've got little clamps which will overstretch. Hopefully bite down on. So the trouble with these clamps is they are a little bit fiddly. I would have preferred if they were just straightforward steady clamps, but we didn't have that luxury on these. That up, okay, and then this one around the front, you can probably use the pegs again. Okay. So what we want it to do is to lay in here all very nice. This one we might have to hold down the back. Then what you can see, this gap that you might get underneath here, what we can actually do is we're going to pop around with resin and super glue to make this a perfect strong seamed weld line, if you like. Okay, so we're just going to pop this one in. I'm going to hold it for a little bit, but you may be able to see we've got little bubbles on this as well. So, you know, these are all little things that you need taking care of. But one thing I've learned doing ships recently is you're better off to get it all together as a whole than to start messing around with it in individual parts, because you can go back and detail things afterwards, and that's what we're going to do with this particular build. We're just going to take our time, get it together as best as we can for the moment, then we're going to jig around with it and trying to get it all sort of straightened out and everything, and it all sort of lined up and looking good. Okay, and then we can come back and we can sort of take care of all the small little details, cleaning up bits, obviously things like this before we move on to paint and everything else. But my major concern is trying to get these mismatched parts that don't go together at all well at the moment together. Other thing to look out for, obviously, if you're using kickers or curers with super glue, is heat. This is on resin. Be careful, you don't want anything going melting or bubbling or anything else like that. So just take your time with it as you go all the way through. So if you give me a bit of time, I'm going to roughly get this bottom plate into position and try and get the front half lined up with it as well, okay, which I'll show you in a moment, putting those two together. Once we've got those in place, okay, I think what we can actually do then is have a good look at the side skirts, how they're going to fit. We've obviously got to open it up to get a lot of this LED work in there, but for the moment I think we're going to have a real chore of trying to get this all lined in purely because of the warpage. Now, again, there's not a lot of point me showing you about the warpage on this one. I'll show you how to fix it generally, but obviously every kit is going to be completely different. But if you're dealing with large scale resin, you expect this type of thing, you know it's going to happen and everything else like that. It's actually glued already on the back, which is quite a nice touch. So there we go, we've got this one into position, so we just need a little bit more glue down here in the middle, but it's not too bad a fit. I think if we get some very thin glue in there, we can go around and really sort of make a difference with this one. But we need this one in so we've got the correct curvature on the bottom. We can line it up then with the bottom plate for one of these engine ones just to make sure it's all going to fit in there and it is at the correct angles, because again, if this is not the angle we've got here, it's never going to fit. So okay, let me get on with this one and then we'll come back and we'll try and put this thing together on the bottom half. Okay, so we're getting there. The plan of action is sort of laid out in my mind now. I know what I'm going to do and how we're going to do it. Two big things we've done. First of all, we've put the back together. Now, this is just my way of doing it, okay? The way I'm thinking is this thing is so out of shape and so misaligned. I need some structures that have got minimal movement that are going to be my sort of templates for working my way through. Obviously, this is a complex shape. It's not just a flat triangle. It's got angles and facets and things in it like that, which are going to be a real headache to get them to all line up because there's just so many different angles on this thing. So this engine section being back here, as you can see, it's glued together. It's just super glued at the moment, but it's a nice strong fix, and this is going to give us our angles that we need for the top and bottom. So this guy down here, as you can see, we've done this one. Just about get it all in. We got some damage that we're going to have to take care of, so we've got these back down here. These here, which looks like control surfaces, this detail, obviously we're going to have to fix a lot of this. They've been chipped off, but as I said, what I'm going to try and do is get this thing together. Now, you may be noticing some of these marks all around here. What this is resin. We spoke about it before, and I'm going to show you in the next stage after I've got this together about making it up, when to use it, when not to use it, things like that. Basically what I've been doing is I've been tacking it with super glue as I go round, knocking up a small amount of resin and then pouring it in all the gaps. The great thing with resin is it doesn't bleed out on the other side. It tends to be just that little bit of thickness to it that stops it from just the capillary action just running off everywhere. Okay, so all I did, come along with these for instance, and I dropped it down in here and it's run along and made its way around this tail, which I didn't want it to go up there, but it doesn't make any difference. But certainly down this front area we had quite large gaps, and I don't know how well, but we're pretty good. We've got one down here, which to be honest is my sanding, a little bit over the top, but generally looking across it and down it, you can see we don't have any gaps underneath. Trust me, they were there, but the resin has flowed down, bunged up all of those holes, and the great thing is, you may be able to see this area at the front here, we actually have sanded this because we had a little bit of resin come out because I give it a bit of a squeeze and we put a bit on here, and because it's resin, it is beautiful stuff to work with. It's not as hard as super glue, it's very forgiving. You can scrape it with a blade, you can cut it with a blade, and just give it a light sand, and we've polished this in absolutely perfect. So we're really liking it. couple of things I'm noticing as we're going around. For instance, over here you can see we've got a 1mm piece of plastic card. That is because without it, when you put these two sides and you line them all up, it had a step of 1mm. So little things that will save you a little bit of time. Also, you might remember we had a very nasty gap on these two here. I know it's quite nasty at the moment. It's not perfect, to be honest. This is me sanding. I think I've oversanded this area, and down here it's not exactly the strongest little bit of resin, shall we say. But what we have done is removed the strip from the back here. And don't get me wrong, all the parts we cut off we are keeping. We've got them all in this position. This is because when you come to put in the bay, if I can get this all to sort of balance up and everything. So when we have this sat in like so, okay, and we come along with the underside piece, let's try it this way. So you need about 8 hands to build one of these. Okay, when you pop this guy in here, we can see we've got a little bit of damage up here at the front we're going to have to take care of. But if you're lining all of this up, and I say I don't know which camera angle is going to be best here, let's try on the side one. I know the resin's a little bit glary, but to line all these up it has to sit in this position, so it's back a little bit than what it should be. But then we've got this bar at the back, which when you see it up on the upright you can see you've got the angle, which is fair enough. But before, when we tried to put these areas in together like so, this triangle area is higher than the rear one, and then obviously those parts we had here were along this edge and preventing it from fit, so it wouldn't fit full stop. And it's one of those head scratches, you're thinking, okay, there must be a way around it, perhaps we've got warpage problems and things like that. I don't think so. Honestly, I don't know why it would even be there, because when you put this in now, before we had quite a poor fit, now we've got quite a good fit down underneath there. It's going to be minimal filler and everything else to go in, and that's it. So what I'm going to do is sand this down a little bit and then re-add these details on the top, which they'll go on something like to the top of the moon pool. Goes that way if I remember correctly. I'm calling it a moon pool. I don't know quite what you call it on a ship, a spaceship rather than, but it'll go on just like this. Okay, and that'll give us all the detail we need, or it may be a case of I might just scribe them in. Might be a little bit easier, but I'm certainly finding working with this kit now a little bit that some of the, I wouldn't call them errors, but some of the differences between some of the parts going together, I am wondering if this is the front end from another one. It's just the way it sort of lines up and everything else like that. It's not a perfect fit. The other way as well, these, which was, we said before, were the sort of the bars that ran through it are strengthening. I've sanded them back a bit because they are interfering down below. And the trouble you have with these things, when you're like this and you're going, oh yeah, that's it doesn't quite fit. When you flip it over and have a look on this side and you come in and you put them in and that, you end up sort of thinking, oh, it's okay, and it's very hard to see what's going on the underside. So I'm finding it better to say, right, okay, we're going to take it back a little bit and we can move forward. So in hindsight, what I've done is already I've tested by putting these side ones down both sides completely. Now these are the iron cannons which go down the sides and the sensors, or so the information tells me that's what they are. They all do line up, they all go in there pretty well, and this bottom bit definitely seems to be at the correct angles and things like that, so we don't have to worry about that too much. But it's just one of those things of, I'm worried about gluing it together in case it's wrong, because it's going to be very hard to start to rejig this and to get it straight out, because I don't want it to be a situation where it's all over the place. It's got to look right. So the bottom, now we've put in this little bit of plastic card just down in here, lends itself very well for fitting this to the top. Okay, so what we can do now is what we did before. So all we're using is, to be honest, this is a little bit older super glue than what I have. It's a little bit thicker, it's been around a little while. So I'm tacking. When we say tacking, we are literally just putting in a drop, 3 drops like this, and then we're just gonna put a little bit just down there, and then we're coming along with our underside. Okay, then we're happy how it's lining up and everything else like that. Okay, and what we're going to do is just going to clamp this little guy, or hopefully we might be able to sit it actually just in place. Actually that works even better. So quite how well you can see it, but down here we've got a bit of a gap, but we're going to take care of that afterwards. So we're just going to seat that down there. We're just going to nudge that off the front. Okay, we're happy how this is and how it's butting up and the angles it's all at and everything else like that. Seems to have a good grip. Okay, so again, iron bars, well, these bars actually work really, really well. If we just stick one on here and then a little bit of tack just stops it rolling off, and the same on the other side. What this is doing, it's holding everything square because it's continuing the line. So if this is raising up or pushing down, by putting these bars on, they give us just that right amount we need on there. So now whilst they're sat there, we can just manipulate these around. So we've got little gaps at the end. These are things we will take care of when we are to there. We've got a little bit at the top. Okay, we've got more bars here. I think that'll work quite well in there. If we just bung something in there of about the right width. Let's try a sponge. Actually, that works quite well. Again, that works quite well. And this is it. It's a bit of the old MacGyver mentality here, okay, of finding what works best. So we've got a little gap on this side, but we knew this bottom one was going to be a little bit more gappy than certainly this side. But this is giving us a flat level join between the two. And again, we'll use resin to fill up the gap. But also, actually, it works quite as a nice panel line running down there. Okay, and this one's looking pretty good, but the sides are level, it's all even. I think we're pretty good down the front end. It seems to have the right slope because these bars are sat right on the top and not lifting off in any direction. So that's the thing with it, and that's the point of using these heavy brass bars, is that it does flatten everything out. And to be honest, it's what I use for straightening these, and these work an absolute treat. So there we go, that's roughly tacked into position. When I say it is literally tacked, what I'll do is once it's dried off in about half an hour, flip it over, and I'm going to use some plastic card and just tack it in a few other areas to make the join across. Okay, when we're happy with that, what we're going to do is flip it back over properly, knock up some resin, which I'll show you about doing, and we're going to pour resin in these joins and seams and everything else like that. And what we'll probably do is mask this side so we know we don't get any resin flows through and then out and causes a problem. And then we can flip it over, sand this if it needs it, put more resin onto it, perhaps add some more detail if we want to, and that will complete the underside and should start to then to make things a lot easier, because we know the base is good, we know it's at the correct angles and everything else like that. So when we push forward with the build, the alignment should be a lot better because we've got this nice strong piece at the back which we're going to resin up as well, so that one will all be fine. And then that way we can start to then look at these side areas, getting them fitted in, and once those are in, we can then re-resin everything on the underside here, which we'll cover, to seal it up. So this will make it, one, completely rock solid, and two, it will stop any light bleed getting out, because obviously we've got these massive LEDs in there, lots of light coming off of them. The worst thing we can happen is we've got like suddenly gaps and there's lights shining out and all things like that. Once that's done, you can paint it all completely black, fix the lights in properly, and then we can then start working of lining up and getting everything to join and make sure it's in the right position for these other bits so they're actually sat on top. Again, no light bleed, no nothing else. So hopefully when the two halves come together, we get a nice perfect sandwich fit to it with no problems. Okay, so as you can see, base unit is together. We've super glued the front half on, basically to give us the squareness of it. I'm trying to work out the geometry. As I said, it's all about geometry with this aircraft or ship or whatever you want to call it. If you get that right, I think it's going to be a lot easier. So what we've actually done is I've put the bottom part in, and to make sure the geometry actually works, we've used the edges that we've glued together at the back here. They've got locating tabs. You've got one over here and we've got one down here, and these guys just sit quite nicely on those. So we know by, we can pick a camera, we need a wider angle camera here, but you can see here from this side, we've got them at the right degree, the right angle. We've got a small gap down here on the tail, which we're going to have to take care of. Funnily enough, we've got one at the top, but we know this is all lying straight and everything else as we work our way through. The trouble we've got though, when you flip it over, you can see we've got a nasty gap up here. This side's not too bad down the bottom. Okay, so that is the base unit done and gives us an idea of the size of this thing. All right, so if we just place that over here a second. Next up was the top half. Now the top half is a lot more difficult because obviously we've got movement down here at the back edge, and we have got this trouble with this top part being in the wrong shape, and it looks like it's collapsed down and everything else like that. Now what I did do, and I haven't shown it on camera, I've made up this jig, and overnight what we actually had was it laying down on the bottom here like this, okay, and it's been pushing up, and we had our bars on the top each side here pulling it down, so, and just see if the weight would do it. And funny enough, it worked really well, and it did manage to bend it all in one. So all we did, we had something like this. We can get it to sit back how we had it. Okay, because obviously I put it into the bottom half so we knew where it all was. So basically we had that down in just like this, and then I had these bars on each side, okay, and because they're so heavy, it actually bent it into the correct position, so we didn't have to worry about sticking it in hot water and trying to bend it and force it and everything else like that. At the same time, we did all these side parts here for the sensors and the laser cannons. They're fine as well. They managed to straighten out as well. So really happy how a little bit of, you know, say brass rod has done a great job. It's saved that sort of problems you can have, because if you try and do it where you've got a situation of like you're gonna have to use hot water, fine on a small piece. So if you were doing something this size, no problem at all. When you're doing something this size, it can affect everything, because what might happen is it might just go on the edges and you don't get a straight line with it. This way we're pretty much in there. So this side's glued in as well, and as you can see, the original the original Star Destroyer's line cut brake was there. The kit one, they've done it further forward, okay? So, you know, obviously this is why you've got these areas in. The trouble with them all is, with all of these parts is, we need to have proper solid fitting areas behind that we've got no gaps. And if we have got some small gaps like this, it's not too bad on the top, as you can see. They're in there pretty well. What we want to use is things like resin and stuff like that to do it. Now normally you might use resin for making molds, and let's face it, I've got a mold kit over there, and you can produce your own parts, okay? We're going to cover this in detail on a standalone video, because doing it as part of this build will just eat into our time, okay? So bear with me over the next sort of few weeks, and I will do a standalone about making your own parts with resin, and making your own molds and silicone molds and things like that. But for the moment, what we want to do is use it as a filler. Now, the stuff that I use is this stuff. That's the hard. Here's the resin. I use the resin stuff. This is the G26. It does come in a large can. It is not cheap. Very expensive way of doing it. You can go out and buy smaller kits, smaller quantities and everything else like that. But I tend to use quite a bit of this stuff from sort of, you know, day-to-day things a few years ago. Not so much now. The thing is, it works out, I think this is, it comes as a set. We've got the hardener here. I'm just trying to remember what price I paid for it, to be honest. I know it wasn't cheap. It's quite expensive, about 25 quid for these. And as I say, you've got enough now to make up, I don't know what's in litre, it's 1 kilo, but 2 kilos of resin from this, because obviously it's a two-stage system. So you've got your resin and you've got your hardener. You mix the two together and away you go. What you can do with it, what we're going to show here though, is actually making up a resin for, if we do the other side of this one, because there's more of it to do, for, this is where I need a rack, for areas like we got this joint over here and here, in here a little bit. I've already spotted some around. This is the lighter colours you can see, okay, around there, and obviously we used it down here as well because it was quite cracked on this, so we wanted to make sure we were okay. But you can use it for really strengthening things up, because when this stuff goes off, it is really strong. Thing to remember is it will still act like a glue rather than a weld action, because if you wanted to, you could peel this stuff off and it would probably come away separate from the resin that's actually down there. So don't think this is going to be like a gluing, you know, like a weld action glue, something else like that. This is more of your traditional gluing way. It's quite a straightforward way of doing it, so it's just a little bit different to how it says on the instructions, so I'll show you. So what I've got here is a little plastic cup. which isn't always the best way of doing it. If you're doing large quantities, use something with a lot more strength, because don't forget, when you put the resin in, no problem at all, it's just resin, it'll stay, it looks like honey, it'll be like that forevermore, okay? When hardener goes in, chemical reaction i.e. heat, okay, and that is what is going to set it and make it all go all hard. So what we're going to do, we're going to run it around here, we're going to run it around on the other side, and also we're going to run it around the back end of the engine here on the seams and the joints, purely so we don't get any light bleeding through, okay? Because this is the other reason we're using resin instead of other fillers or just super glue. This way it will have no light penetration in it at all. So first of all, we're going to take our pinch to open. This is our, make sure we got the one, that's the hardener. This is the resin. Always put your resin in first, because obviously if you put your hardener into this in a pipette form, you're going to end up setting what's in here. So we always start first. So we're going to take not too much, because you're not going to need gallons, but we've got 1, 2, 3. So we've got 3 drops in here. Thing is also to remember, this stuff goes off extremely quickly. So if you knock up too much and you've got too much sat here, what's going to happen is you're going to end up wasting it, because you're just going to end up with blocks of resin everywhere from where you haven't used it. So you're better off doing a small quantity, and then you can just then come along and knock up a little bit more as and when you need it. Okay, what I'm doing is I'm positioning stuff in so I can just get on with it when we're ready to go, rather than having to mess around and sort yourself out, because as soon as this one goes in here, it's going to start setting. Okay, right, so what we're going to do is I'm going to use it the pipette way. So we just clean off the outside of our pipette here, and obviously it's a one-shot thing. Once you've used your pipette, it will start to set, so you're not going to have a use. Now normally it's a 50-50 mix, but I don't want this to go off too quick, so you put this honey looking liquid in here. So what I'm going to do is 2, okay, and then we're just going to mix it up in the colour cup, or colour cup even in the cup here, okay, and I'm going to blow it in and blow it out just like so. Now this is starting to work almost immediately, but it gives you enough time to get your lids back on things. Okay, now as soon as you use it like now, it's going to be extremely runny, okay, but the thing is, very very quickly it's going to go from being runny to being start to thicken up and go thicker. So do your runny areas you want first. So to be honest, I want to run it down in this area, all down in here. Okay, I want to pop some down along here. You don't have to worry about bubbles or anything, so that's pretty straightforward. But already it will start to get warm. Okay, and then as soon as it starts to get warm, the chemical reaction is starting to work. So we're just making this bottom completely solid, making sure it's all in there. Okay, so I'm just going to pump this around, and now it's getting warmer, it's starting to get a little bit thicker. Okay, you just want to work it around all your areas where you want your resin. Okay, so that's fine there. And what we're going to do, we're going to try and be a little bit clever here and not move this one out of the way so you can see it. But all we're going to do now is take our next layer, okay, and now it's getting slightly thicker. It's quite handy because this one's got joints and seams, so we can just put this on there. It doesn't matter if it leaks through, because clean up with resin, as we know, is a lot easier than it is with super glue, because when you've got trouble with super glue is when that stuff goes off, it's extremely hard, and it's hard to actually manage and work with and everything else like that. So just do a little bit more on these outer edges. Okay, and then have a look around, make sure you haven't got any cracks, gaps or problem areas where you think you might have a little problem with it. Okay, now for this mix we're just doing literally the underside. So what we're going to do is pop it out of light over down there. You might be able to see here we go in the colour cup, it's starting to thicken up really, really quickly. And that's what we're saying about having too much, because technically I can't use that now because it's just thickened up and it's gone far too thick in the colour cup. As you can see, it's just a sort of gooey mess. So you won't be able to use that. What you can do, which I always find quite handy, if you get some plastic card, okay, and then I'm just going to tip this out onto this, and you sort of roll it out of it, okay. And we're just going to make a resin block. Also pump out what you've got in your pipette if you halfway want to save it, but trust me, it's usually not worth it. But this block will go rock hard, and then obviously you can use it for other things. And if you wanted to, I don't think I've got another bit here, have we? To flatten this out, I think just grab a but you can roll this out almost. Actually, this one's gone too far now, it's just starting to go off, but you can normally roll it out. But you may be able to see you get this greasy oil coming off of it. This is what will happen in here as well. All right, but as you can see, it's starting to go white in all these areas. It will continue to go off really over the next sort of 24 hours, okay? But I don't want to tip it over yet in case it's a little bit runny. But clean up with resin is just so much easier. But as I said, the trouble is we've got this now, and this now is going rock hard already, and you're not going to be able to use it. And that's the whole point. Make up little amounts, and that way you can just keep coming back, do a little bit more, do a little bit less. So obviously we never got around to doing the back end, okay, or anything else. But as I said, you've got plenty of it. You can knock up small amounts, and believe me, sanding and filling and everything else like that is just so much easier when you're using resin on resin rather than, as I say, super glue, because it's far too hard. One thing I know what you're all thinking now is this could be the natural replacement for fillers. Not really, okay? If you're using styrene, resin and styrene don't bond together, they don't weld together particularly well. So what can happen is if you've got any flex in the styrene, the resin filler will just crack and pop out, and away you go. But if you're using it for small areas, by all means, but by the time you've knocked some of this up, and obviously the cost of it versus using a standard filler, it's probably not worth it. But certainly if you're working with a resin object, then using resin as a filler is a lot easier. There is a couple of air holes and things like this around here, a little bit of aero bar, and it's in some really tiny little places. So resin, in some ways, you think, you know, you could put it in there and do it. It's just as easy to use a tiny little bit of filler. So don't immediately think, oh, resin is the natural thing, we'll rush out and buy some, and away you go. Because really, the amount of hassle it takes with it, it's not as easy. The only thing that's handy though is it dries very, very quickly. So this will all be totally handleable and have no problem with it in the next sort of 10 minutes. Dry enough to sand normally within an hour, whereas fillers you might have to wait a little bit longer. But certainly what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to run some of this resin down the back seams of all these guys down here, as you can see, just to make it completely light proof, because I don't know how well you can see it, but you've got some light, I can see it shining through the gaps down the back there. We want those to go. We've got some light in here a little bit and various bits and pieces, and obviously for sanding then we can get in there and start to sand and clean all these parts up and everything else. As soon as that's all done, we're going to flip it over and use resin then just to track it down, which I'll show you, to do the outside ones and make it a lot neater and nicer, so we can sand, take care of these seam lines running across the actual model before we start to then think about, right, okay, sealing up the entire of the inside and everything, so we can look at putting the lighting system and how we're going to do everything else like that.